Hi, I'm Becky Johnson with Sweetheart Quilt Design Company, and today we're going to talk about labeling your quilt. And why would you want to label your quilt? Well, I remember when I owned a quilt shop, periodically women would come in and they'd hold up this big, beautiful quilt and they'd say, "I just bought this for $5 at a garage sale." And you think, I'm really happy for you, but somebody put a lot of time and effort into that beautiful quilt. And yet their descendants, they don't know that. So they don't care. It doesn't match their color scheme in their house. So let's get rid of this. And they don't know that their aunt made it, or their great grandma made it, or their mom made it. They don't know all that stuff. So by labeling your quilt, then you can tell the people in your life that you made it, and then it can be special to them. And one of the things that I like, first of all, one of my favorite ways to put a label on a quilt is to put a corner label on. And I'll talk about how to do that in a minute. One of the things that I like is handwriting. Handwriting has always been really special to me. I remember looking at my grandmother's handwriting, and even though I could hardly read it, it made me feel close to her. And my father's handwriting, he wrote in long, straight letters, and I always liked looking at that. So I figured that if I hand wrote these labels, that would leave something for my children or grandchildren or whoever was interested in the quilt. And you can write on these. I usually take a piece that's left over from making the quilt and cut a triangle with it. And then if you put it on your mat, or some people like to iron it to the to freezer paper, and that helps it stay put a little bit better. I use one of these Micron archival ink pens, which is permanent, so that you can write on fabric with this, and then it's permanent ink. So that's what you want to do, and it doesn't, it's not going to bleed onto something else. Now, then I bought an embroidery machine. So I couldn't resist stitching my labels on the embroidery machine. So the first thing you want to do is give your quilt a name. So I called this one Holiday Wishes. Then I said Beyond the Basics. And this is the Beyond the Basics quilt. And we will have this class up on the website. You learn a lot of more advanced skills in this class, and it's really fun. And you end up with a beautiful quilt. So I put that in there. Sometimes I'll put the name of the pattern. I put that it was pieced and quilted by me and where I live, and then December and the year I did it. Now with this one, this label I have prepared for this quilt over here, I didn't put the year on it. And the reason that I didn't is because I'm going to donate this quilt. I also do that with baby quilts. I like to make baby quilts ahead of time so that when I get an invitation to a baby shower a week before the shower, I can give them a quilt. But you don't want to give them a quilt that's dated that you made it 4 years ago, because then it feels like a used quilt. Even though it is brand new, it's been hanging in my closet waiting just special for them, I don't want it to say that it's 4 years old. So I leave the date off of that. But other quilts, you do want to put the date on them. And even when I change the quilt on my bed, I always look at the label and think, oh, that's when I finished that quilt. And it brings back memories for me. Some of them will say Saturday Sampler at Sweetheart Quilt Shop. That's the shop that I used to have. Then again, sometimes you're making the quilt for a person. It's a wedding gift. So you might want to put their names on it and the wedding date on there. Sometimes it's a birthday gift, a Christmas present, a graduation present. So all of that stuff you can put on there. I just donated a quilt to Stillwater Ranch for their annual big annual fundraiser, and I put on there, after I put the name of the quilt, I put made for Stillwater Ranch fundraiser, so that whoever bought the quilt would always know where, why it was created, where it came from. So with these, now you can put on different kinds of labels. I happen to like to do these triangles, and here I have one prepared that's not sewn in yet. And so I'll pin it here around the sides and then pin it across the top. And then I'll stitch it in, and because this is on cuddle, I have to pull it back a little bit because the nap will move it. But I'll stitch it in, and then when I put my binding on, it gets stitched in again. And then you blind stitch this here. So that's how I put those in. You can also, sometimes you can find labels by the yard. So you can buy a panel of labels and then just cut yours out and pick them and put it in. You can just put it in the middle of your back and stitch it around the sides. I do like this, putting it into the binding. You can also do that with a square, and then someone won't just pick it off. So your label stays with your quilt, because they have to know how to fix the binding if they wanted to remove it. I know a lady that she stitches what she wants and then incorporates it into a block from the quilt, and that's her label on the back. So there's all sorts of ideas. Some people actually stitch it into the back. They piece it into the back. The thing you have to be careful with that is you can't really get it down to the side. If you're having it, especially if you're having it long arm quilted, the quilter has to be able to place your top on there so that the label is in the part of the back that's quilted. But that's a good way to do it too, because then it becomes permanent. So I was making a quilt label here. I'm making this really cute quilt. It's called Noel, and I have it all pieced. I just have to sew the rows together, but isn't that adorable? So I wanted to, this is Hoffman pattern and Hoffman batiks. And so I stitched this up. I'm sorry it's upside down, but I won't be able to cut it if I turn it around. So I wanted to incorporate some of the different fabric colors that are in the quilt in my label. So I used a piece of the background fabric and then just changed my threads. Then I take my 12.5 inch square ruler, and what I like to do is line up so I'm 1.5 inches away from one of the lines, from the edge of one of the lines that sticks out, kind of the lowest one that sticks out. I don't like to go any closer than that, because sometimes the label will shift or it'll get a little more into the binding than I meant to, and I don't want the binding over the stitching that I'm doing. And then I need to make sure that I'm straight on here. Now, if I've already cut the top, I can just go from the top. Since I haven't done that, I need to pick some letters here and make sure I'm a little bit crooked. So I'm just looking at this line and this line and making sure I'm equal distance from that. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is go ahead and cut this carefully so my ruler doesn't slip. Okay, I got it. And then I used a tearaway stabilizer when I did this, so I can just pull this off the back. Okay, and I don't usually worry about getting everything inside. It seems to give it a little more stability if I leave some of it in there. And then I want to trim this across the top, and I like to go from the bottom of the first line I like to go about 1.5 inches up. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this. And then I'll take it and fold it under. You can use your iron, or I usually do a little thumbnail press just to make sure I'm not burning my hands. And then you can press that, trim off these little corners. And then you just go ahead and pin it in to the corner of the quilt like I was showing you with this one. Pin it in, you blind stitch this, and sew that in. When you sew it on pretty narrow so that you're binding, so that it doesn't show that your stitches will all be caught up in the binding. And that's how you make a really nice quilt label, and an idea of why you should take the time to do it. All right, thanks a bunch. Have fun with that.